everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining today, and thanks for the nice introduction, Lois. Before we get started, I am going to show you a few questions here on the screen just to get you start thinking about your own organization. So, thinking for a minute, what is your company's top driver to support a supplier diversity initiative? That's individual to your company and industry. Secondly, have these drivers changed in the last 1 to 3 years? And if so, have you adapted your internal messaging to reflect that? And then lastly, how has supplier diversity gained more visibility since the racial events and increased focus on Black Lives Matter recently? So just keep those thoughts in mind as we move through the presentation, and we will revisit them again at the end. So today's agenda is first, we're going to talk a little bit about influence, tying supplier diversity to the company's business strategy, some of the different supplier diversity drivers, strategies to secure support and gain influence, and then we'll conclude and leave time for Q&A at the end. So as Lois mentioned, we performed a supplier diversity survey last year and published the state of supplier diversity. And overwhelmingly, we heard back from our clients that the biggest pain point was getting buy-in. So getting buy-in, has been a buzzword in the supplier diversity space for a very, very long time. And oftentimes it's very overused, in my opinion. Really, the question is, how do I effectively influence people inside my organization at all different levels and differing responsibilities to help me build and maintain a sustainable supplier diversity function, and also to support my efforts? As we discussed in the webinar, and as Lois also mentioned, times have changed for supplier diversity practitioners. It is a new day, and what you do is getting visibility all the way to the CEO. Leadership is making commitments around supplier diversity that are unprecedented. Now is the time to use that increased interest to build support and credibility and strengthen your business case. So let's talk for a minute about influence. What is it and how you can use it? So influence is having the capacity to have an effect on someone's decision-making process to produce a desired outcome. As a supplier diversity professional, you rarely own a lot of the things that will make you be successful. You don't own vendor selection. You rarely own the ability to make supplier diversity a requirement. So in order to be successful, you will have to get stakeholder support inside your organization at all levels. You will need to influence someone at an executive level to reinforce and drive your message. You will also need to influence procurement, so they will include diverse suppliers. You'll need to influence marketing to help you communicate your message. So in order for your program to be a success, you're going to need to rely on other people. Influencing others in a supplier diversity role is key, and so that's why we're going to spend a little bit of time on it today. So there's 4 different types of influence. The first 3 we're going to talk about are very short-term types of influence that aren't necessarily sustainable. The first is character influence. This is influencing someone because they like and trust you. There's no data needed. They just think you're relatively a good person, and so you're able to influence them. Positional influence is influencing someone because you have a position of authority. An example of this is a boss or a parent. And quid pro quo influence is just like it sounds. You have something of value to the other person, so you're able to exchange it for their action or their support. But the type of influence that we want to talk most about today is called intrinsic influence. This is influencing others by providing data and being a subject matter expert in your area. This empowers the stakeholder to make their own decision and evaluate the data. It creates a more confident and secure stakeholder who can also be an evangelist for you throughout the company. The other types of influence stop at the stakeholder. They go no farther. This isn't to say that you shouldn't use the other kinds of influence. If you have it, you should use all the tools in your toolbox, but it isn't necessarily going to be sustainable, and you're eventually going to want to provide intrinsic influence to make them a long-term stakeholder and supporter. The other thing that you need to do, which I mentioned earlier, is you need to tie supplier diversity to the business strategy. What is the current priorities of the company, and how does supplier diversity contribute to those goals? Supplier diversity programs that aren't tied to the business or the overall strategy of the company aren't going to be long for this world. Corporations aren't going to make significant investments in departments and programs that don't support or enhance the ability to achieve the company's goals and objectives. So why do so many supplier diversity managers live in fear for the continuation of their program when they hear that budget cuts are on the horizon? It's because they have not tied supplier diversity effectively to their business strategy. So I wanted to provide a personal example of how this can be done, how I've done it in the past. So as Lois mentioned, I ran the supplier diversity and responsible sourcing programs at Best Buy. I don't know if anyone on the line remembers, about 7 years ago, Best Buy was, kind of losing steam. The shareholder and stock value had gone down significantly. The CEO left under under not so great circumstances, and there was speculation in the market that Best Buy wouldn't survive. A new CEO was hired and came in and instituted the Renew Blue strategy. You'll see on the screen there were 5 pillars to Renew Blue. Everyone in the company was advised that if their function did not contribute to Renew Blue, they would no longer be needed. So I was able to attach supplier diversity to pillar 3, which was working with vendor partners to drive innovation, and also pillar 5 of continuing to impact positively the world. I changed my pitch when I was talking to new and old stakeholders to lead with the fact that supplier diversity was a function that was essential to Renew Blue, and to explain which pillars it contributed to. Also, you should be using data to make your case. You should have a lot of data. Hopefully everyone on the phone that has a supplier diversity program has at a minimum run a data enrichment analysis. Some of the data that you're going to need to tell your story and increase your intrinsic influence with your stakeholders is at a minimum tier 1. You should know your spend and baseline and be able to talk to it at any moment. At any time, the CPO, CEO, CFO could be asking you, what is our spend? What is our percentage of spend? And you should always be prepared to answer. CEOs are being asked this in post-George Floyd era, and they want to have that data at their fingertips. In order to have credibility in your organization, you need to know this. Another data point that you should know is who are your top suppliers and what is your spend with them? And then even beyond that, where are they located? In what business units are they suppliers to? Do you know how they're performing? Do you know if you should get involved to make sure they're not at risk of being lost? Also, an opportunity analysis is to really understand where the upcoming opportunities are and map those to diverse, rich categories if you can, so you're prepared when those opportunities come about. And the last data point is numbers around economic impact. So beyond your tier 1 spend, how are your diversity dollars impacting not only your suppliers, but your suppliers' employees and the communities where those suppliers live and work? This is very, very good data to have. We actually have a very large insurance company a client of ours that let us know when they were able to socialize the numbers for economic impact, they were able to really get on board some new stakeholders in the C-suite and talk about their spend just even beyond tier 1. So we will, in following sessions, talk more about economic impact and how you can use it. But we wanted to touch upon it here, just you know, to let you know this is a great data point to build your intrinsic influence inside your organization. So now we're going to talk a little bit about supplier diversity drivers or benefits. So now that you've tied supplier diversity to your business strategy of the organization, you're still going to have to make the pitch or sell supplier diversity to the leaders and the divisions and the departments that make up your company. You're still going to need to convince them of the value of supplier diversity for the overall organization. So every stakeholder that you have has their own role in the organization and will be impacted differently by supplier diversity. In order to determine the best messaging for these stakeholders, you're going to need to identify how supplier diversity benefits their specific part of the organization. What is the message that you can give them that will resonate the most with them? In order to do that, we're going to review some of the different benefits or drivers for supplier diversity. So the first thing, and probably the most far-reaching benefit of supplier diversity, if not all of the companies and our clients, is that it contributes to the support of the company's reputation. Our current environment post George Floyd is obviously the perfect illustration of this. Brand protection and brand enhancement are in the forefront right now. You see companies are left and right being called out for not having enough diversity in the workforce, in their suppliers, and companies are having to pivot to respond very quickly to the additional scrutiny. It is great for supplier diversity and your job that this is happening right now. For companies that have been doing this really well for years, and we have a lot of them are our clients, they already have some brand protection. They can also highlight or shore up their efforts to increase their brand enhancement and perception even more. They believe in diversity and inclusion, they can show it and they can demonstrate it, especially when outside events like these happen. They are the companies that are on safer ground. For companies that may not have performed so well in this space, or maybe paid a little less attention to diversity and inclusion, those folks are coming out of the woodwork now to put a plan quickly in place. They're putting new strategies in place to protect their valuable brand equity that they've taken so long to create, and to demonstrate how they are now understanding the importance of diversity and inclusion in the eyes of the customer, and they're working to improve their efforts. The post-George Floyd era is calling for different attention. Companies are responding and making commitments like never before, and supplier diversity is a very big part of this story. The last way that supplier diversity can contribute to the reputation of a company is social responsibility and benchmarking or competition. So now social responsibility, companies have responsibility for the economic and social environment that they work in. They need to be responsible social citizens. Companies are now realizing that this is something that they should have been doing all along. They should have been providing equitable opportunities for everyone, and that is now becoming part of the supplier diversity business case. In the past, supplier diversity practitioners and professionals haven't always wanted to highlight social responsibility as a big driver, as many folks really wanted to just focus on financial drivers. This thought pattern has shifted, and the supplier diversity case needs to shift to reflect it also. Social responsibility is becoming, if not is, one of the main drivers for supplier diversity. The other thing is competition and benchmarking. Fairly or unfairly, you are often evaluated by how well or poorly you perform by the person next to you. It's true in athletics, it's true in academics, and it's also true in business. If your company is not keeping up with the Joneses or your competition or your competitors, it can reflect poorly on your brand. So know your competition, share it internally, often with stakeholders. As proof of this, just to let you know, CVM is getting an overwhelming amount of requests for benchmarking data for our clients. Clients want to know where they fall in their industry and if they're outperforming their competitors, performing in line, or if they're underperforming. Competition and benchmarking is often a very good hook for C-suite. They all want to know what their competition is doing. So spend some time finding that out. Supplier diversity also contributes to the sourcing function. Increased competition can reduce the cost, the overall cost of a project. Just organically, the more bidders that you have, the more likely it will be that the cost of the project will go down. And diverse suppliers also can bring additional innovation to the table. We also have an example of this. One of our clients was telling us about a pallet company. This had typically been a sole sourced area for our client, but they brought in this diverse supplier. The diverse supplier was able to consolidate all of their packaging needs of the client. They provided better service and greater consolidated insights for our client. By the way, they also were cheaper. And this supplier, this diverse supplier, grew from a very small company to a $50 million company in a very short period of time. Diverse suppliers are also oftentimes more responsive and have better customer service. I know that everybody on the line has had the experience of calling a large national corporation to try to get a live person to help you with an issue that you're having. We've all felt the frustration of, getting in the queue and waiting for the automated system to come and help us, and oftentimes have to hang up without resolution. Diverse suppliers, that isn't going to happen. You're going to get somebody on the phone, they're going to get a live person on the phone, and they're going to be able to help you much, much more quickly. And an example of this is, during the COVID, the beginning of COVID, where there was shortage of personal protective equipment, there was a lot of diverse suppliers that were able to fill the gap. Some of them pivoted and started making new products for clients, and some of them were just able to fill gaps with products that they already had. We also had a client tell us that their small and diverse suppliers in that space were more honest and transparent about what the market was doing and the difficulties that were out there than some of their larger suppliers. Diverse suppliers can be more flexible and nimble. They can more quickly and easily adapt to changes and requirements from your company. An example of this is technology companies, where if you're going to buy software or other solutions from a really large company, you're going to get an out-of-the-box product. With small and diverse suppliers, oftentimes they'll take their current products and adapt them to meet the specific needs of the client and be able to customize a little bit to meet each client's unique needs. Supplier diversity also contributes to revenue. So there's several ways that supplier diversity does this, and you'll be able to make some quantifiable measurements that you'll be able to share in this space. That will help you drive intrinsic influence and communicate and solicit support from your stakeholders. So customer requests and government requests continue to really drive the Tier 2 space. The good thing is that you can quantify this requirement to support your business case. You can sum the value of all of the contracts that you have that have supplier diversity requirements and use that number as the amount that would be at risk if you did not meet or exceed your customer's requirements. You'll also want here to be able to name your top customers that are requesting supplier diversity information and how much revenue they represent to the company. Again, this is a risk factor that you'll be able to share for if you don't participate in supplier diversity. And by the way, we're only seeing the trend for Tier 2 reporting continue at CBM. It's growing, and it's actually even moving deeper into the supply chain. We have clients asking for Tier 3 reporting and beyond. So, if it's important to your customers, it needs to be important to you too. And beyond just your current customer base, you should also be thinking about potential opportunity. Corporations are exceedingly asking questions around supplier diversity in the RFP process. They want to know that if your company is the recipient of the opportunity at hand, that your values around diversity and inclusion align with theirs. You should be partnering with your sales team to provide robust information for them that can differentiate your company from others. So I'll share an example here also. I do have permission to share this from United Healthcare. United Healthcare often bids on insurance contracts at the state, city, county, municipality level, hoping to win the contract for their health insurance. The Supplier Diversity Department is able to provide those sales teams with data around how much United Healthcare spends in those communities, and also which suppliers they're already using. By providing that information up front in the RFP, United Healthcare is able to differentiate themselves, from the other competition. So, and the reverse can also be true. What if your biggest competitor is a diverse supplier? You should have a very, very tight and buttoned up program to be able to articulate why you should be the recipient versus a very well qualified diverse candidate. So this isn't as far-fetched of a discussion as you might think. We actually have 2 current clients that are in this particular situation, and there probably is more. So, spending some time thinking about how you can arm your sales team with valuable data that will help them differentiate your company in the sales process will help you gain some very valuable stakeholders. So now the $1 million question, how do I do this? How do I actually go out into my company and secure support? So you're going to use your influence to try to secure the support of so many different internal stakeholders. They all are going to have different priorities. Sometimes they're going to be competing priorities. One of the first things we recommend is to map your stakeholders. So in the chart on the screen, you'll see 4 different quadrants. On the left and on the bottom are sliding scales for influence and engagement. We'll start in the upper right quadrant with a partner, or also could be known as a sponsor. These are ideal stakeholders. They're usually also invested in the outcome of your program, and they believe in your mission. And they may also have indirect responsibilities, in supplier diversity. They have a lot of influence inside the organization, so they can make connections for you. And an example of this could maybe be a CPO or a CEO sponsor, and often hold a leadership position, and they're your most valuable stakeholders. In the upper left quadrant are prospects. So these are people who have a lot of influence but might not be engaged on a day-to-day basis with you. You'll want to use your influence, and they'll want to help you using their influence all they can in sharing the message. These are often people who can say jump and everyone jumps, and they might not engage on a day-to-day level, but they have the authority to get things done in the organization. An example of this might be someone else in the C-suite, a CFO, you know, or someone with a lot of influence inside the organization. In the bottom right, we have evangelists. So these folks are also just as important. An example here might be a sourcing category manager. These folks are going to have success stories. They're the ones that you want to provide data to so they can go out and share your message and create more stakeholders inside your organization. You want them to be engaged. They can find and bring in new suppliers, but they might not have a lot of influence beyond their role in the company. And then in the bottom right, bottom left, excuse me, is the skeptic. And you will have them. We all have them in every organization. Hopefully it's not your boss, or that's probably a sign you may want to be looking elsewhere for a new job. Typically the only way to motivate these type of stakeholders are providing a lot of data over and over, real life examples. Don't spend a lot of time in this quadrant. They're very difficult to engage, and when you do, the juice probably isn't going to be worth a squeeze. The key to this chart, though, is to understand that it is not a one-time exercise. After you plot your stakeholders in the chart, you should work on how to provide a customized message for them to move them into one of the more valued areas. This will help you focus on the people where you should put the most effort in and develop individual strategies that will resonate the most with them. Sometimes you need to be creative on who your stakeholders are. This is just a depiction of, you know, what I could think of as potential stakeholders inside organizations. It's by no means exhaustive, but hopefully will get your creative juices flowing. And think out of the box a little bit. You know, where are areas of the organization that you might not have thought of before that could be great help and support to you? We do have a client example here also. We have someone who's running a supplier diversity program, and you know, they didn't have a big budget. We're not getting so much engagement from, you know, the C-suite or getting much attention. And this client of ours happened to be riding down the elevator with the CEO. And, you know, it took that time to share the supplier diversity story, and I guess gave an elevator speech, literally, to the CEO, and was able to share the story and had enough time to pique the CEO's interest, was called back in for a meeting, and the CEO became a very committed partner to supplier diversity. Her budget increased and her influence also increased inside the organization. Another thing that we often hear is effective is to get your leadership engaged externally. So, you know, we're consistently hearing also from our clients that getting public attention for their programs or their leaders is very helpful in driving engagement with them. One client told us that the event that impacted her program the most was having a C-suite leader accept a national award on their behalf. The leader was able to network with other leaders at this event, and it increased the engagement immeasurably. So is there a board of directors that you can nominate your leaders for, either for an affiliate organization or even perhaps a national organization? Those folks externally will help reinforce the message that you've been working so hard to land also. It's also going to get them involved in the supplier diversity community in your area and get additional attention for your program. The same goes for panels and speaking engagements, you know, and use your network to see if you can make connections for your leaders with other committed supplier diversity leaders, with your colleagues, your external colleagues, and, you know, and get them engaged in the community. The next recommendation that we have is to be adaptable. So companies all have very different reasons, which we've talked about, for doing supplier diversity. Those reasons can change over time. The stakeholders can and will change over time. And the expectations for results of your program are also going to change over time. So you and your message need to be adaptable and flexible. So knowing your audience. You should have spent time researching your potential stakeholders and adapt your approach based on that audience. So for example, if you're speaking to the CFO, you should be going in with a message with financial data, perhaps using the value of all the contracts that have supplier diversity information requests is one of those figures that you can use. If you're talking to a chief diversity officer or a chief communication officer, you should probably lead with benefits around how supplier diversity contributes to the company's reputation. So consideration needs to be given to the driver that will increase your influence with the individual stakeholder. You should be meeting the stakeholders where they are and speak to them in their language. And the next point is strategic priorities. So going back to tie it to the business. Outside events, financial situations, many different factors can change the strategic priorities of the organization. Stay in tune with those and be able to adapt your message to fit the current strategies for the company's priorities. Next is something that we have labeled an accountability call. I have a client, a large technology company, that called me the other day and said, my CEO was asked in a public forum what our small business spend is. This company had never really calculated or tracked small business spend, but luckily they had been performing data enrichments for many years and we were able to get that data easily for them. So your leaders are now being asked very publicly a lot of points around data that they probably don't know. Be ready for those accountability calls to have data and arm them with the correct data, now especially. External events, this kind of goes without saying. 2020 has been quite a ride between COVID, between George Floyd and the racial riots that have been happening. Hopefully 2020 doesn't have any additional surprises in store for us, but regardless, you should be prepared to pivot your message and respond when those type of things do happen. And lastly, you need to be adaptable to changing leadership. This is very common. Everybody in the supplier diversity space that has been doing this for a while has had this issue. We hear often, that our client, a person has just won support, has just really kind of provided all the data to really engage a key stakeholder, and new leadership is brought in. Or now supplier diversity is going to report up into a different department. So you need to be very flexible and understand that landing your message is never a one and done. That's a core function of your job, and you're going to have to do that quite often, unfortunately. The next thing you want to do is make sure that you're educating all of the stakeholders and even beyond your stakeholders. So you never want to assume that anyone, even the leaders, have any idea what supplier diversity is, or have prior experience with it. So don't assume that people know that know about this. There's always the big question of why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important to us? But there's also the question of how. How do I help you? Okay, you've provided me very valid information, but what exactly should I be doing to contribute and help? It's also very important, to provide some historical context around supplier diversity. Where did it come from? How has it evolved? There's a lot of misconceptions out there. Still, even today, a lot of people think that there's tax advantages for supplier diversity, or that there are set-asides where the company's paying more and expecting less for supplier diversity. So as part of your job is you're educating people to dispel some of those assumptions that are probably, sit with some people inside your organizations. Other areas, that you want to educate about are customer requirements. How many customers are asking you for this? What are the different diversity categories and certifications that are important for your company? Where is your program going? Where do you want to get? What your goals are? And then procurement. So procurement will need some additional training. Those folks are on the front line of this. So what are the expectations of them as buyers? What are the processes and procedures that they will need to follow? And do you have internal tools that can help them find suppliers, track suppliers, evaluate suppliers? So educating folks inside your company is also an ongoing function that never goes away. So if you can build a training deck and spend quite a bit of time on it, it's going to save you time in the future. You can also, I always try to say to give this to every stakeholder that you're meeting with prior to the meeting, giving them a chance to review some of this stuff before you meet with them, so they can ask appropriate questions. And also this is going to present you as the SME and demonstrate your credibility before you even have your first meeting. So the next recommendation is to extend and leverage your network. So you're one person. Most supplier diversity, teams or professionals are a one-man show. That's not always the case. We do have very committed companies that have 5 or more, but that is usually the exception and not the rule. So you can't really be everywhere, everywhere internally and externally. So you're going to need to build a team of stakeholders that can help you and that are invested in your success. And one of the things I often used to say is that I don't own this initiative. It belongs to the entire organization. My job is to be here to facilitate and implement processes and procedures that we've all agreed on and share what the benefits are. You need advocates and stakeholders to expand your reach, increase your presence in the organization, and enhance your credibility. So some of the ways that you can do that are by getting a sponsor. A sponsor you want at the very highest level of the organization. So preferably a CEO, but could also be someone in the C-suite. They're your last escalation point, and they're also the face of the program. So if you're writing policies that are externally focused, this would be the person that would sign that. You can also either start or contribute to leadership committees. If you can't have your own leadership committee for supplier diversity, you might want to connect with your diversity and inclusion teams. They're often providing updates, almost always providing updates to a C-suite leadership committee. Ask them if you can tack on to them. Ask them if you could also provide data to update them and give them visibility. And then also working committees. These are your worker bees, the folks that are in front of what opportunities are coming up. Meeting with them monthly or quarterly will get you in front of opportunities and help you be prepared to provide qualified diverse suppliers when the time comes. These folks have usually shown themselves to be very enthusiastic supporters and will provide the additional presence that you're going to need in the organization. Another thing to do is to align with similar functions like the diversity and inclusion team. Often these folks are have encountered the same types of obstacles that you have. They can sometimes share resources with you, and they're good people to bounce ideas off of because they're usually very like-minded people. But the one thing, the most important part of that is they help you, stave off isolation. If you're a one-person team or, a very small team, kind of being part of their group will also help you not feel so isolated. Network externally, join your regional and local NMSDC and WeBank affiliates. You're going to meet the people there that have the same job as you. They can, we all know supplier diversity is notoriously collaborative. So get involved. They can share their wins and struggles with you, and you can take those learnings back to your organization. And then ask for referrals. Don't be afraid to use your network to ask for referrals. And thanks for meeting with me. Is there anyone else inside or outside the organization that you think would be a good supporter? This is a relationship building job. Use that network, leverage the network to increase your amount of stakeholders and your influence inside the company. Attend those employee resource group meetings. Make sure they know what you're doing and you know what they are doing. These are often folks that are very enthusiastic about inclusion in your company. So get to know them and learn what they're doing also. And then lastly, stay enthusiastic. I think that's, it might be not even need to be said, but enthusiastic people attract enthusiastic people. People want to be around folks that believe in what they're doing and love what they're doing. And it can sometimes feel like an uphill battle, but keep your enthusiasm up, and people will be drawn to support you. So just to recap a little before we conclude, some of the recommendations we made were to tying supplier diversity to the business strategy. Make sure you stay relevant by speaking to the fact that you're aligned with the company's priorities. Map your stakeholders, know who they are, know what their role is, and adapt your message based on their role in the company. Know and be able to speak to your data. Be adaptable and flexible, and understand that this is an ever-changing environment that we're living in, and you and your message both have to be flexible to meet those messages. Engage your leadership externally to help you land messages from the outside affiliate organizations that you're already trying to land inside. And then extend and leverage your network. Ask for recommendations. Like I said, this is a relationship building role. So make sure that you have a large network and leverage them. So, to conclude, we're just going to go back to where we started, and thinking have any of your thoughts changed around what your company's top drivers are for supplier diversity? If those have changed in the past 1 to 3 years, and if so, have you adapted your internal message to meet those? Make sure that your message is relevant to the times. You may have inherited this role. Go back and make sure that the messaging is up to date. And then, how has supplier diversity gained more visibility since Black Lives Matter? We know that it has, because we're seeing it inside our organization from our clients. So it's more about thinking about how. This is an unprecedented time in history. This is a moment that we haven't seen for supplier diversity in quite some time. So make sure you use that to your advantage and get the visibility. Use this time to get more attention and attract new and different kinds of stakeholders. So that is the end of the webinar. Just a quick reminder that there are the 2 webinars coming up on executing your strategy and growing your program that Lois talked about at the beginning of the session. Mark down those dates, and we'll be sure to get a link out for registration very soon. And then Lois, I'm ready for Q&A if any questions came through.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Molly. And there are some questions that have been posed, and I will get right to it and throw the first one out to you. So with the new focus, are you seeing any changes in how to engage buyers?
Well, I think, it's a little, it's a little bit not directly engaging the buyers, but we're seeing a lot more commitments from leadership. So if the CEO is saying we're going to double our spend in 2 years, the responsibility for that is going back directly to the buyers. So you can use some of that positional influence, that authority where it isn't becoming optional or it isn't staying optional for the buyers. If the CEO is making a public comment, then they are going to have to change what they're doing. So yes, I think it's more of a trickle down instead of us, at least at CBM, hearing the direct influence to the buyers.
Thank you for that. The next question. So you mentioned benchmarks. Do you have any benchmark examples that you can share, what you consider to be benchmarks?
Well, it really varies by industry. Some of the things that you'll want to look for, obviously, is spend and a percentage of spend. You'd also look at how many suppliers you're using in the different diversity categories. But it really depends on the industry. For some industries, there's very public information out there. So take, for example, the insurance industry. The CADES survey, formerly known as MIDS, is a public, it's a survey that insurance companies are required to answer, and they provide the results publicly. So you can quickly go see, where do you land? Are you on the lower end or the higher end? And they have historical data around that too. For industries that might not have quite as much public information, as we mentioned a couple times, supplier diversity is very, very collaborative. Ask your colleagues, join industry groups. The NMSDC has them, WeBank has them. Those folks are talking about their performance all the time. So people aren't afraid to share with you kind of where they land. So if you can't do it formally, try to do it informally.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Next question. In your experience, how long did it take to gain intrinsic influence with a stakeholder?
I think intrinsic influence is actually, it doesn't necessarily take that long if you have the right data for the right stakeholder. It may take some time for you to pinpoint what is going to stick with them, but credibility is built, but when you have data to back up your credibility and appropriate data for the stakeholder, you usually can win them over relatively quickly. It's not so much about this whole long process, but really about providing the right data and then letting them come to their own conclusion. And those are stakeholders for life, for lack of a better word. They really, they came to the conclusion on their own based on facts and data. And so, they'll stick around with you, but you just have to make sure you're providing the correct kind of data for them.
Great. So we'll move to the next question. What should we do to start a new program? What I do to get it started? We are in the process of putting a program in place for the first time.
Oh, awesome question. I love that, and I love to give advice and help for folks that are just starting, because I've been in those shoes before too. The very first thing you have to do is do a data enrichment and understand what your baseline is. That is the key to everything. You can't really start having conversations with people until you're able to say, here's where we're at, and here's, we're trending very low compared to the industry and our competitors, or we're kind of in line, but we need to shore up. So that's the very first thing you need to do. And then you need to get an influential sponsor for the program to help you land the message that this is a new initiative and what everyone's expectations are. So those, for me, are the first two steps. Sometimes I think when folks are starting a new program, they might bite off more than they can chew. They might want to say, okay, we're going to do tier 1 and we're going to do tier 2, and we want to do an economic impact. And, really focusing first on tier 1 and getting your own house in place and building off of that and getting the engagement is really, the first step in the evolution. You can't really, Rome wasn't built in a day, isn't that what they say? So, remember that as you're getting started.
Thank you. So we have questions that are pouring into our Q&A box. So let me move to the next one.
Okay.
What do you think of using a scoring methodology to evaluate which sources do the best in meeting your supplier needs?
So I guess I'm not understanding which sources do the best. Does that, I guess I would think that it means suppliers, what suppliers do the best from a scoring perspective.
And
yeah, go ahead, Lois.
I want to say, since we have some other questions, will the person that asked that question, would you reach out to your client success manager, and maybe if we get a little clarity on specifically what you're asking, we can certainly schedule a time to talk to you about it. Let's see, so the next question, how do you decide which race gender benchmarks to use when deciding how much diversity spend the company should use for women-owned, Black-owned, Latinx-owned, et cetera, suppliers? How do you decide which race/gender benchmarks to use?
Well, it depends again on your industry. Benchmarks are going to be very different by industry. But with your internal data, what you should be doing is understanding where the majority of your spend is. Typically, it's not always, but I will tell you what we usually see. Typically, you're going to see that your women-owned business spend is higher than your MBE spend. And then understanding the MBE spend at the ethnicity level is also important. So that will give you the opportunity to understand, where should you be focusing your efforts? Should you be, if you have very high women-owned spend but less MBE spend, we really need to focus on those areas, focus on recruiting those type of suppliers. From a benchmark standpoint, truth be told, ethnicity has not been a major focus before the time we're living in. People are always able to track ethnicity for MBEs. It is becoming more of a topic. So now folks are saying, not only saying, what is my MBE spend, but what is my Black-owned business spend? So, you're able to track that, but you should be comparing, even benchmarking against yourself in those different diversity categories. As far as external benchmarking, it's going to depend also on what industry you're in.
So Molly, if you're a really fast talker, I'm going to give you this last question. How do we gain access to the procurement decision maker in 30 seconds or less?
Okay, hopefully the procurement decision maker is the CPO, and hopefully you report to that person. That isn't always the case, but if you do, you're in a very good position. If not, you need to engage your boss to get an audience with the CPO, have conversations with them, get in front of them and show them your business case. They are the decision makers in procurement, and they are the ones that are ultimately going to give direction to the buyers.
So thank you so much, Molly, for a very informative presentation. And thanks to the audience for joining us. And please mark your calendar for the other seminars or webinars, and we will talk to you then. Any other questions we didn't get to, please contact your client success manager, and we will work with you directly. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.